We had a couple of light frosts earlier in the month, but it wasn't enough to put an end to our frost-sensitive crops. But that changed this weekend, with temperatures forecasted below freezing on Saturday night. So on Saturday, we harvested the last of our frost-sensitive crops. Let's take a look at the harvest. So here's a look at the complete harvest. We have sweet potatoes, butternut squash, beans, tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, and tomatillos. Let's start with the sweet potato harvest. This was our second year growing sweet potatoes in raised beds in the front yard garden. They produce a lot for us because we eat both the tubers and the leaves. Before harvesting the tubers, I removed the vines, which we trained up a teepee trellis we made out of bamboo and twine. Eating and trellising the vines makes it much easier to manage them because otherwise they might take over the whole front yard. After removing the vines, I started digging for tubers. These are Japanese purple sweet potatoes. Both the skins and flesh have a beautiful purple color, though it's hard to tell now when they're covered with soil. Last year I started the same variety under cover in early May. This year I planted later in May without cover, so it'll be interesting to see if there's a difference in tuber size. I like to harvest sweet potatoes with my hands to avoid damaging them. They store better when the skin is fully intact. To cure them, I'll simply place them next to a radiator in the house for 7 to 10 days. Then they'll easily store through the winter in our basement. And we'll have plenty of sweet potatoes to enjoy this Thanksgiving and Christmas. I did find some good-sized tubers, but overall they weren't as large as last year's harvest. So if time permits, I'll try to get them off to an early start under cover next year. Gardens are always full of surprises. You never know what crops will be standouts in any given year. For example, last year we had a very poor butternut squash harvest, but this year was a very different story. Our one butternut squash plant completely filled this trellis this summer, and we saw early on that bees and other pollinators were doing their best to make sure we'd have a good harvest. These 3 fruit on the trellis by themselves are more than we harvested last year. But there's more. While I was away on vacation, the plant spread in every direction. The vine climbed the neighboring honeyberry bush and gave us 1 more fruit. It also headed north through tomatillos and tomatoes and gave us 2 more butternuts here in the walking path. 6 butternuts this size are a pretty good harvest for us from 1 plant. They'll easily store well into the winter in the basement, and we'll enjoy them roasted, mashed, and in soups and pies. This was another great year for peppers, and we were happy to have one last harvest before freezing temperatures set in. We grow our peppers in 7-gallon grow bags in the front yard, but to get a start on cleaning up the front yard for the fall, I carried all of the grow bags out back before harvesting. Leading up to today, we've been keeping on top of our pepper harvest to make our final harvest more manageable. We're already drying peppers in the house. We'll eat many of these fresh and probably freeze the rest. We also harvested the last of our eggplants, which we also grow in 7-gallon grow bags out front. I'm planning on making one of our favorite Indian recipes with these. We usually have a whole lot of green tomatoes to harvest before our first killing frost, but this year we started eating fried green tomatoes a few weeks earlier so that we'd have a more manageable harvest. Even so, we still got a lot of tomatoes picked yesterday. Our tomatoes definitely struggled after the first couple of light frosts, so it was definitely time to pick the last of them. We'll eat the ripe tomatoes fresh and put tomatoes that are starting to ripen in paper bags in a warm location. We may also put bananas in the bags. Ethylene released by the bananas will help speed up the ripening process. Finally, we'll enjoy fried green tomatoes and green tomato salsa. This was our second year growing purple tomatillos, and like last year, we had a great harvest. We especially like these tomatillos in a roasted tomatillo salsa. To make harvesting easier and to get a start on garden cleanup, I cut the entire plant at the base before pulling off the remaining fruit. As you can see, the plants were still loaded with tomatillos. We had only 3 plants, so the harvest didn't take very long. After removing fruit from the plants, I picked up ripe fruit that had already fallen from the plants. I just had to make sure they were still in good shape and not infested with insects. We were in such a rush to get our harvest done before it got dark that I didn't have a chance to videotape every harvest. So while I was picking all these crops, my wife was harvesting beans. Some of these bean pods were absolutely gorgeous when they were growing, but they're not looking so great now. We'll be eating all of them as dried beans, and this gives you an idea of what the dried beans look like. We have cranberry beans on the bottom, Good Mother Stallard beans next, rattlesnake beans, and then on top, these are Christmas lima beans. All very pretty beans, and again, we'll be eating all of these as dried beans this fall and winter. So this is the last of all of these crops for this year, but we're still growing a lot of frost-tolerant crops. In fact, we'll have those crops growing all winter long. Hey, Oscar. Getting in the chute. And Oscar and I will be bringing you videos on how the garden is doing in the fall and winter. And that will include harvests as well, so I hope you'll join us for those. Let's go inside, buddy. Come on, Oscar. No, you gonna stay outside? All right.